Hello and welcome to Soul Family Chat, a platform to envision new possibilities for a new Earth. I'm Guy Harvey, your host. If you'd like to be notified of future shows, please hit the subscribe button below and check the notification bell. That's below there. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Steve Briggs. Steve is a yogi, author of 2 books, a tennis champion, and a coach to tennis champions. He's practiced transcendental meditation for over 50 years. And during his 47 years as a transcendental meditation teacher, he has instructed thousands of students on 4 continents. He spent many months residing in a Himalayan ashram and made pilgrimages to hundreds of holy sites in every corner of the subcontinent. He's the author of 2 books, India, Mirror of Truth, a 7-year pilgrimage, and the Tale of the Himalayan Yogis. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thanks, Harvey, for having me on. Thanks, Guy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's delighted to have you here. Do you have a number of how many people you've instructed in meditation?
Over 2,000.
That's incredible. So
I would say I've presented to maybe 20,000.
Remarkable. So that's an incredible influence that you've had on the world. Can you tell me, just to start out, can you tell me a little bit about the journey from your youth of being a top athlete, you're a top ranked tennis player, to wandering around the Himalayan mountains and meeting with holy men?
You know, the spiritual journey is different for everybody, but it actually starts at the same point, in my opinion. As a baby, everybody's held in their mother's arms. And to me, that is the first spiritual experience that we have. In fact, when I met a yogi in the Himalayas, he said, you know, the mothers of the world are the true saints. And I considered him a saint. I said, why is that? And he said, you know, when the mother holds her child, something special happens. And he called it merging. In other words, the 2 consciousnesses of the mother and the baby, they become one. And so I don't have memories of that, but I do know that it had an impact on my direction. I would say more consciously, when I got into high school, I was in an AP English class, and we had 4 options of books to read. One of them was a novel by the German novelist Hermann Hesse, and it was Siddhartha. You know, part of it was about the life of Buddha and a couple of devotees of his, and so on. I think it's a very popular book, and I think it was written mid 20th century. So I chose that, kind of being the rebel that I was, over the American authors. And that opened a window for me. It just kind of woke me up a little bit. And at that point in time, I think I might have been 16. And as you alluded to, sports was really big for me. I started playing tennis when I was 6 with my older brother. And by the time we were 10, we were playing national tournaments, gaining national rankings, that sort of thing. And I thought, okay, I want to be a professional tennis player. I want to be like Roger Federer is today, that kind of thing. Didn't know that I didn't have the talent to do that, but that was my goal. So as I got into higher level matches, I realized that my mental state was crucial for my performance. And there were times when I would slip into, for lack of a better word, a different state, an altered state of awareness, and athletes call it the zone. You slip into a state where you sense what the other guy is going to do before he does it. You hit the shots that you want to hit effortlessly. You're just flowing. The fluidity of your mind and body, the coordination is so synchronized that you're in a higher state. And that experience would happen not all the time, but it happened fairly often when I was really focused. And when I read Hermann Hesse's book, somehow those 2 ideas clicked together. They brought some clarity when I read his book about maybe what I was experiencing on the athletic field. And so I started, you know, doing some yoga. There's probably 1 book in the entire public library in my hometown of Rock Island on yoga. And so I grabbed it, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't really get anywhere. But it was the kind of the moment when I thought, okay, there's something more here that I need to tap into to realize my potential as an athlete. And a couple of years after that, I learned transcendental meditation And my first comment to my instructor was, "Hey, I've had this experience before." And he thought, oh, wait, you don't have it until you learn. I said, no, I've had it, but it just happened to be in the field of sports. So from there, things took off. Within a year, I was with my teacher, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, my guru, I should say, in Switzerland for most of the winter, and became a TM teacher, 1973.
Wonderful. And so you became a teacher in 1973. And when did you start to travel in India? Oh, just one thing I wanted to say, Siddhartha was Siddhartha is one of the big influences in my life just before I learned to meditate
cool.
as well.
I noticed you were smiling when I, No, he's great. I read most of Hermann Hesse's books, Glass Speed Game and so on and so on. And they really powerful books. He was certainly a master of his craft. Ironically, when I first got the idea that I wanted to learn TM, I was I studied English literature at the University of Arizona. I was, as my coach reminded me frequently, hey, you're here to play tennis. I was on a tennis scholarship. I said, yeah, well, okay, that's fine. But, I don't do it 24 hours in the day. And I loved literature. I always appreciated literature. And so I became an English lit major, and I was sitting in a Shakespeare class, and there was a poster of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi on the wall, and I was just looking at his face while the guy was talking about King Lear. The professor was giving his presentation, and it was crystal clear to me, even just looking at that poster for about 10 minutes, that, okay, this is my next move. And it played out perfectly. All the way through college tennis, I sat down every day before my matches and so on, and I had my meditation, and ultimately, a couple of years later, I helped teach about 25% of the professional tennis tour to meditate, including five former Wimbledon champions. So they had the same response I did. I've had this experience, and I said, of course you have, because you don't have to be an athlete to have that experience. Of course, you could be in any field of life. You could be a soccer player, a musician. You could be an artist. Whatever you're passionate about, whatever wakes you up inside and inspires you, those are the kind of things that bring these peak experiences in any area of life. So your question, I get back around to, was
about
India?
traveling to India.
Yeah.
When did
Gotcha. So many years passed after I became a teacher in 73, and I taught TM in various places in the US, mostly in Tucson, Arizona, where I was what they call the center chairman during some very prolific years, which Maharishi came and did some television shows on a famous talk show called Merv Griffin. And so we were super busy down there, and I was playing tennis 3 hours a day. I was doing English literature, and I was teaching about 20, 25 people a week to learn TM. So later on, after that kind of hands-on experience of teaching a lot of people to meditate in the US, I was invited by Maharishi, along with a couple other guys, to go to India because I had an MBA, and to introduce his meditation to corporate India, top corporate India, Fortune 100 of the Indian business world. And the reason for that was India was coming out of a very socialistic, closed borders economy. They wanted to open up to the Western world. And Maharishi thought that to inspire that creativity in the senior management, they should all be meditating, and also to handle the stress loads that they were going to be experiencing when they had Western business pouring in through their borders to compete with. So we went over, and it was immediately a really good match. And before I went, I said, well, Maharishi, how is it that these Indian businessmen, what are they going to think when you're sending Americans to teach them what's their own? Meditation is their thing, and we picked it up from them. And he laughed and he said, well, Indians love to have their songs sung by someone else. So I said, all right, I'm happy to do that. And we went over, and I think over the course of the 7 years that I was in the program. By the way, the program is still going on very strong with the fellow that I went over there to launch it with. He's been doing it for over 20 years now, Lane Wagger. People picked it up. They really went for it. They knew they were under stress. People were having high blood pressure, all the common factors. And we went all over the country. We taught in all the big houses, Tatas and the Birlas and the Modis, and wonderful people. From middle management up, everybody that spoke English we taught. And if they wanted their factories to learn in their local dialects, we brought in our local teachers to do that. We had an absolute, we were treated like princes everywhere we went in the corporate guest houses, and they'd bring us in, and we'd teach them meditation. We play tennis and golf with them. We do things. But when we weren't teaching, and there were plenty of times we had some downtime, we would head off to the Himalayas because we were based in North India. We were in Delhi, and when the first summer it rolled around, I called up Maharishi. We called him up, and I was on the phone. I said, Maharishi, I just can't handle this heat in Delhi in May and June. And he said, go to the mountains. So I thought, okay, because the day I arrived in India, I'd been to India twice before, but the day I landed in the Delhi airport, I had this gut feeling that there's somebody over here that I really will meet and want to meet. And it never left my mind in 7 years. And finally, that meeting came about, and I'll get to that maybe later on. But going to the Himalayas seemed to be the place that chance meeting would be likely to happen. So we would go up. I think our first trip up into the Himalayas was pretty deep in. It was up to the source of the Ganges called Gangotri. And we would go to these places, and we'd get in a guest house, and we'd stay for a couple of weeks. Now, most Indian pilgrims, and there are hundreds of thousands of pilgrims that go to these holy places on buses, but they stay about 4 hours. They go out, they take a dip in the river, they do a puja, they do a ceremony with a local pundit, and they all have some snacks, and they all get on the bus and go to the next place. But that's not our style. We wanted to kind of sink in, meditate in this holy place. And so we stayed for 2 weeks. And when you're in a small place that has a small number of residents, year-round residents, and this is at 10, 12,000 feet. So the local sadhus, they see who's around, and they see who comes and goes, and they're extremely dedicated spiritual people. So the first trip up there, we met 4 or 5 fascinating holy men. And I'm going to hold up a picture for one of them because I had some really fun interactions with him. And let's see if this works for you.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
You got a young American there who's my wife's son, and Maharaj. So this photo was taken in 2010, 15 years after I had first met Maharaj. And I took my family back. I'm married now, and I took my family back, and we did these holy sites together. So this fellow Maharaj has always stood out in my mind as one of the more interesting characters. And he is a Nagababa, which is a type of holy man that basically is very much a renunciate, and he lives in a very large ashram in Varanasi. That's how he got started, and he'd been staying in Gangotri year-round for about 10 years. To stay in Gangotri year-round without plumbing, without heat, at 10,000 feet is challenging, because he told me that the snow that would accumulate in the dead of winter was much higher than his little house, his kutia, his hut. So it was like 10 feet high, and they carve a walkway over to the river. And, we'd sit down with him every day as we got to know him. And in the beginning, he was a little standoffish. He wasn't sure, whether we were just tourists or what. But as we talked to each other, and he asked us questions, and he realized we were sincere. And so he opened up. And he had quite a high level of consciousness. No one could ever say this person's in this state of enlightenment or such. But I popped a question on him after a couple of days, which is a question that came to me because Maharishi used to say, one litmus for a person's state of development, spiritual development, is what is their experience during sleep? Are they, like most people, unaware that they're asleep, or are they actually what we call witnessing sleep. Is the self wide awake during sleep? So I thought, okay. And I said, I didn't know what he was going to say, but I thought this will give me some sense, because it's not easy to get a clear picture otherwise. So I said, what Maharaj, what's your experience during sleep? He said, well, you see this, he pointed up to the sky. He said, you know, there's Jupiter up there, there's Mars, there's Moon. I go to those planets while my body's asleep. And then he took a stick and he had from the fire, and he started in the dirt, he started drawing circles. And he said, this is a solar system, and this is a solar system, and this is a solar system. And in between these solar systems, there are Brahmastans, and then there's on and on and on. There are galaxies. He said, I just like to travel. So okay, well, great. So I thought, okay, this sounds like a fairly good resume for a sadhu, and it piqued our interest, and we asked him other questions. And he said, one morning he said, see that bird that just flew into the waterfalls up at Gangotri are spectacular. Devi Kund and Surya Kund, there's two of them. And he pointed out there and he said, see that bird that just flew into the water there? And there's this, I could see it. And he said, that bird's not a bird. That bird's a yogi having his morning bath. And I thought, oh, interesting. I hadn't quite thought of it that way. The water's probably 40 degrees or at most. So Maharaj was our first encounter, and he was fabulous. And I didn't know whether he'd still be back there when I took my family 10 years ago. But my wife's son interviewed him, and that was him in the picture, Devala. And he was just as charming and just as open. My stepson interviewed him for his college paper in some world religion class. So Maharaj was really the first Indian holy man that we met, and we had an incredibly great impression of him. I was with Lane Wagger at the time, and there were several other interesting characters up at Gangotri on that trip that I met. And one was living in silence. He'd been in silence for 7 years. His name was Paranand Tirt. And I walked up to his cave by accident. Some of these guys live in little stone kutyas. They build it themselves, maybe put a sheet metal roof on it. That's where Maharaj lived, near the falls. And Paranand Tirt actually lived in a cave. And they wall up the front of the cave with cement, and they put a door on it so they can padlock it. So that's kind of their residence. And Paranand Tirt, I said, do you speak, when he was sitting out in the front of his place? And he waved his hand, said, no. But then he went inside and came out with a piece of paper, handed it to me in a pen. And he said, he had written on there, I don't speak, but you can write me questions or speak to me, whichever way, and I will write the answers back if you want to talk sometime. So I said, sure, yeah, I'd like to. And he wrote to me, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from the US, and I'm a teacher of transcendental meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And he wrote back, is Maharishi's University still in California? This is a guy who'd been in silence. So that we got kind of started with that. And he told me that he was inhabiting his guru's cave, and his guru was called Swami Hansa, means swan. Swan is an appellation that's considered to be very appropriate for peaceful yogis. And his guru had been in that cave for 37 years before he had health problems and went down to a lower place at Uttarkashi. And and Paranand Tirt then had taken it over. And Paranand said, it wrote, when you go back to Delhi, you should stop and meet my guru. And so on the way back, we did. We went to room 23 in the ashram, and he was extremely lovely. He invited us in, and he, more than Maharaj, the fellow, that picture I showed you, he had true darshan value. Darshan is the power from the eyes or from the presence of a holy man. And when we went into the room, immediately that presence was there. And you've experienced it around saints, of course, Maharishi and others, and I have too. And Paranand Tirt's guru Hansa Swami had that presence. When I sat in front of him on the floor and I was looking at him, we brought a bunch of mangoes. He was like 98 years old and didn't have any teeth left, so he could munch mangoes better than other things. And the sensation was his eyes, he was just looking right through your head, right on past you, right through you, I should say. And it was very powerful. And both Lane and I, when we got done with the darshan, we were really speechless. We were frankly spaced out. It was very powerful. And he sat with us for maybe 10 minutes, and he says, "Now I'll take my leave," which basically meant, "Now you guys should go," because he probably thought that's about all we could handle. But he made all kinds of blessings and said, "I wish you highest moksha in this life," and on and on. So those were two initial encounters, 3 initial encounters, pardon, on tears. Maharaj, by the way, the Naga Baba, whose picture I showed you, he asked me some questions that were a little uncomfortable. And I'll just repeat them because I'm thinking of them. He said, "Steve G, have you eaten meat in this lifetime?" And I said, "Yes, Maharaj, of course I have. I grew up on it until I learned meditation, but I have been a very dedicated vegetarian, or plant-based diet, I guess we call it now, since I was 20. So that was at that point in time, 35 years. He said, "Well, if you've eaten meat in this lifetime, then I think you should just take a cave here in Gangotri to prepare you for your next lifetime." And I said, "Well, that's pretty discouraging. But don't for your listeners, don't get too concerned about that. I know of some of the greatest saints in Indian history. I know firsthand from their direct accounts in their books and from meeting them, that they grew up in cultures where, by the ocean, where their father was a fisherman, and they grew up on a steady diet of fish. So I just thought it was an interesting thing to throw out there. Sure. He said, basically, "You've blown it already, Steve G. So come on back." I thought for a minute. I said, "Could I handle his lifestyle?" And I said, "His lifestyle?" I said, "Absolutely not." I loved being up there, and I spent 9 months in a Himalayan ashram, which I absolutely loved, and maybe we'll get to that later on. But there's more than one way. There's more than one path. There are, for every human being, there's a unique path, and I recognize my path was not to sit in a cave. And he chanted the 1,000 names of Mother Divine every day, Lalitambika Sahasranam. That was his, as far as I could tell, his principal sadhana, his principal spiritual practice, as well as he kept his japa beads going nonstop. So he'd have his mantra, presumably an Om type mantra, and he kept that going, whether he's talking to me, whether he was talking to his buddies, whether he was there alone, and that went on, as far as I could tell, around the clock. So these guys were the real deal, and very humble people, very focused people. He had plenty of fire, and you needed fire internally to live at an altitude like that year after year. He had, as you might have seen in the picture, a lot of vibhuti covering his body, sacred ash from the fire. And they cover their body with that ash to keep it warmer. It keeps them from feeling too cold. So those are 2 or 3 of the first encounters I had with Indian holy men. And there were, I don't know, in the book I read, I'll hold it up. So you mentioned I could hold it up on. Well, this is the book, and that's it.
Yes, India Mirror of Truth.
India Mirror of Truth. And we came up with a really nice picture of Divine Mother, Mother India, actually. India is considered to be a feminine disposition. And I don't know if we're going to get into gender politics here today, but I'm happy to. Anyway, I could go on with other.
Well, I have a question for you.
Absolutely.
You said very nonchalantly, "I called Maharishi." And Maharishi was one of the biggest teachers that came from India and came to the West, and literally had millions of followers at one point. So you obviously had a personal relationship with him, that you were able to call him on the phone, which is absolutely remarkable in itself. And later you talked about darshan, that presence, that feeling. What was your experience of just been in the presence of Maharishi, or even just talking to him on the phone?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you giving me that opportunity, because I knew Maharishi quite well, both individually, personally, and in a group for 22 years. I was in his group of monks. And he never ever referred to anyone that I could tell in that group of monks by name. He wanted to kind of eradicate our sense of ego, the small self. So he always just referred to this Purusha or that Purusha. Purusha was the name he gave to this group of monks. So when I went over with a couple of my buddies to Holland, where Maharishi's international headquarters were, he wanted to prepare us for this project. And we all could see that we'd been on many projects with Maharishi over the decades, but we sensed that this was a bigger project than in some of the projects in the past where we'd gone to the Philippines or to the Middle East or to Australia, because he spent about a month kind of gearing us up. And we met with him every night. And this was a meeting that I'm going to tell you about, where there were four of us: Lane Wagger, the other guy who taught the corporate people with me, and two other guys, both named Tim, who had another project brewing in India at that time. So we were meeting with him pretty much every night, and Maharishi would work around the clock. You'd finish with your meeting, and then as you were leaving at 2 a.m., another group would roll in, and they'd have their meeting till 4 a.m., and then they'd leave. And it went like that 7 days a week. And people would say, well, Maharishi, you'd take a little rest around sunrise. But I had been in the room with him at times when the sun was coming up, and I was dead beat, exhausted. So we were late at night, and we were sitting in there, and we'd kind of gone past the project talk about how we wanted to introduce our programs to corporate India. And we were just chatting, and we had served some fresh orange juice, and we were just very relaxed. And I noticed that he was kind of looking over my head. He was physically looking at me, but he's looking over my head. And I didn't feel uncomfortable about that. I was just delighted. Okay, he's actually doing something. And didn't know what, but I felt very happy to be in that situation. And then we went to bed about an hour later. And when I was sleeping, about 2 hours into sleep, I was having some mild witnessing of sleep. And suddenly I had the experience that, in my inner light, in my inner awareness, that Maharishi's there with me. And he smiled. And then he reached out, didn't say anything to me, but he reached out as if he were a plumber, meaning somebody who fixes, faulty pipes in a house. And he reached out and took his hands like this and put one pipe together with another pipe. It seemed to be some kind of internal plumbing within me. And then he disappeared. And that next morning, I was a different human being. I woke up, I had sat down to meditate, and it was absolutely a different kind of experience. And I thought, well, I don't know what he did, but whatever those two pipes that I had in my physiology that weren't connected, they are connected now. And I could, go into more detail about that, but I'm not, here to really chronicle my personal experiences. But that was just one example of what I felt was the experience of Maharishi kind of looking around at me and then seeing, oh, this guy needs some help.
Yeah, sure.
And he gave it, and he gave it. And he did it very efficiently, and he's gone. I've talked to other people who've had that kind of experience. So that happened one night. And then there was another night when it was, again, just the four of us plus his secretary, a very jovial guy named Brahmachari Nankishore, who was a monk as well. So Nankishore had an incredibly infectious laugh, very blissful guy. And he was always with Maharishi and always doing anything Maharishi wanted him to do. So that night, Maharishi and Nankishore were talking about some other project, and we were listening in. And it seemed to me that Nankishore was bringing up some really good suggestions. Maharishi, we should maybe think about doing this for this hospital in India. And Maharishi said, no, Nankishore, bad idea. And then Nankishore would come around again. And he would giggle when Maharishi said, no, 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 bad idea. And he would giggle. And then he would come around another angle and he'd say, Maharishi, I think we should do this in that hospital in India. And Maharishi said, no, no, that's a terrible idea. And then Nankashore would giggle some more. And this went on for about 15 minutes. And I kept thinking to myself, you know, Nankashore is spot on. He's right on in all these suggestions. And what is Maharishi doing to Nankashore? And as this whole drama was playing out in front of us, finally in my head, I was ready to kind of explode. The thought came like this big sign in my head. Maharishi, Nankashore is right. I didn't say that, of course. I just thought it. And right in mid-thought, Maharishi turned from Nankashore, looked me in the eye and says, what it is? Nankashore is right? And I go, great, great. He got me. You know, I was a little dense there, but finally I realized that, you know, it was a setup. He just wanted to, I don't know what his little test was, but I just figured, okay, I failed that test. You know, I basically, as a devotee, you know, the tradition is you just kind of flow along with the teacher, with the guru, and agree with him, and know that he's, if not omniscient, quite all-seeing. But here I was, you know, bucking the tide, and I was saying, no, Nankashore is right here. And I was thinking it. I didn't say a word. You know, I would never say a word, but he nailed me. And then I thought, okay, lesson learned. Here we go. Maybe one more story on because I absolutely adore Maharishi. Always have, always will. He got me my head straightened out. You know, I'm in college, and when I learned TM, and a year later I was with him in Switzerland, and it gave me a foundation for how to live life, and I've been grateful for that ever since. When we were, as a group of 200 monks, Europeans and Americans mostly, we were in Germany, and we were there in 1980. Wait. Yeah, around 81, 82. We're still East-West Germany. And we were meeting with Maharishi in the monastery chapel. And there was a really good graphic artist named Lawrence. And Maharishi was telling Lawrence to do certain things. And he said, now, Lawrence, what I'd like you to do is get all the other artists together and make a big map of united Germany. One Germany only, because that's the future. We're going to have a united Germany. And that time, you know, we're meditating in Germany to help sort of make a peaceful radiance or influence in the country.
Just one second, you said 1981. Was it around?
It must have been. I'm thinking it was before the fall of the Berlin Wall.
So you're talking.
I'm talking
7 or 8 years before.
Yeah,
before it transformed.
that's why,
amazing. Yeah.
Right. That's why I was hedging. I wasn't remembering. Let's see. It was actually 78. I believe.
Wow.
I believe it was 78.
And just for our younger viewers, the Berlin Wall was 1989, correct?
Correct. Right.
1989. Yeah. The Berlin Wall came down in 1989.
Yeah. So Maharishi, you know, had that vision. He had that insight that this country is going to be healed and it's going to become a one united country again. That's as we know it now. And no one at that time even thought that was remotely possible. So those are, you know, just little personal stories out of a whole bunch that I have, and there are many people who have more fascinating stories than mine. And I ran into some wonderful Indian sadhus who had been devotees of Maharishi's in India, and one of them lived in the.
What is a sadhu, Steve?
A sadhu roughly could translate as an Indian holy man, an Indian seeker, not a saint, but someone who's maybe taken up vows to live a spiritual life, and very often they're living a single celibate lifestyle of that style. Yeah, so that's a sadhu, sadhu. When we were in South India on our I've been to India on 2 or 3 projects over the years, and the main one we're talking about was the corporate project. But I had also been there on an earlier project in 1977, 78. And in that project, I was teaching meditation to universities and college and high school students in Tamil Nadu, the southernmost state of India. And on that trip, we also made pilgrimages. And at one point in time, I went down to, with a couple of the people I was working with, we went down to the tip of the subcontinent called Kanyakumari. Very, Cape Comorin is the term down there. And there's a famous temple to Divine Mother in her young girl, virgin girl incarnation. And she's very special. And she's very special for Maharishi because that's where Maharishi went when he received some intuitive insight that he should leave India and teach meditation in other parts of the world. That was the temple he was at. And so we wanted to go there for a number of reasons. And when we went there, we had a wonderful experience in the temple, but just outside the temple was a very famous woman saint, and her title was she was an avadut. So we just mentioned the term sadhu, but an avadut's a whole nother level. An avadut is someone who doesn't go buy food in the market. They only, for example, only eat what someone brings to them. So if there's no food, they might just grab a coconut and live off of coconut for a couple of days. So it's a much, much more austere situation than, say, the life of most sadhus. So avadut. This lady, I later learned, was renowned throughout India and particularly South India, and her name was Mai Amma, M-A-Y-I, Amma, A-M-M-A. Amma means mother, mother who recognizes the illusion of the world. Mai Amma, we were told, was a couple hundred years old. Mai Amma looked as if she was 80 or 90. She had very leathery skin. She'd been living outdoors. She used to, according to local people, she would wander in the forest for weeks at a time with nothing but a skimpy cloth covering her.
That was going to be my next question: is had you met people that were beyond the 100-odd years that people expected?
I didn't know her age, and no one tried to tell me her age. But years later, I heard a story from a Swami, very highly regarded Swami from the Himalayas, who swore to me that he could prove evidence that she was hundreds of years old.
Remarkable.
Okay, so that suspend belief, and I don't doubt it. The experiences I've had in India, I don't doubt it. And I'll get to one other saint that I would venture to say might have been thousands of years old. Okay, so Mai Amma lived in this little grass hut, and she had a couple chelas, disciples, who were looking after her, but she had no worldly desires whatsoever that I could see. A couple of dogs were hanging out near her kutia. And one of the things that Mai Amma liked to do was at certain times of the month when the tide was moving in a certain way, she would climb onto a block of driftwood like a surfer in San Diego, going out on his surfboard to have some fun. She would climb on a block of driftwood and the tides would take her out to sea. And that was that story was told by many local fishermen who would be out fishing with their nets, and they would see her floating around in the waves out in the middle of nowhere, and that she just loved to do that. That's the type of personality, if we can even fathom it. I don't think we can. So we were told by the local people, if you are interested, by all means, go and have Mai Amma's darshan. And so and they said, and if you do go, bring her big bunches of bananas. She likes the red ones. In South India, there are probably a dozen types of bananas, small ones, big ones. The red ones are extremely tasty, and the actual meat of a red skinned banana is more golden. So we brought her, every one of us brought her a bunch of bananas. And as we went to see her, somehow dogs started gathering. And by the time we sat down and we're sitting on the sand with her, and she wasn't even paying any really attention. Her mind was completely off somewhere. She'd be looking at the sky. She'd be looking at the dog. She'd be glancing at one of my friends. And once in a while, she'd just mutter something to her chela, her disciple, these guys looking after her. But she was very abstracted, very much not connected to this world. And then as we started to peel the bananas to offer her prasad, more and more dogs. And dogs are not quite like dogs in America, in India. I'm sure you know, Guy, that, you know, we call them street dogs, and they're kind of mangy, and they're feral. They're not looked after by anyone, but they don't cause problems, but they just eat the leftovers outside a restaurant or whatever. And so they started gathering. I would imagine there were 8 or 10 dogs by the time we got into the stage of offering her our fruit. And so we had no idea what was going to happen, but we were told, bring bananas. So I handed her a banana. She took a chunk of the banana and she stuffed it in the dog sitting next to me, in his mouth, lying next to me. He opens it. He knew the routine. I didn't. So the dog hits his slice of banana. Then she breaks off a chunk, and in it goes into my mouth. And I'm thinking, great, you know, these are street dogs, and her hand was just in his mouth. I didn't know at the time, but I read about it later, that actually dogs, their mouth and tongue are actually far more hygienic than most human beings. Then she went to the next dog, and then to my friend, and then to the next dog, and she went round and around like that, you know, with several bunches of bananas. And it was all a lovely gesture, an incredible touching gesture. And as she did it, this is getting back around to your question, have you experienced a saint's darshan? Well, that darshan for me was brilliant. You know, I felt like I was in the middle of in one of my best tennis matches as a kid, you know, when I was just complete, everything was the way I wanted it to be. Win or lose, I couldn't lose. And I think that's an important thing in life. And I'm digressing, but the very best tennis match I ever played in my life, I lost. But I came away absolutely thrilled with the way it went. So if we base everything on the absolute outcome, in terms of score, we're missing the point. And that just happened to be that I was playing with the United States national champion. I was 1 point from beating him. I didn't beat him. My coach was upset. My dad was upset because I was so close. I wasn't upset. You know, I thought, wow, this was a wonderful day, wonderful experience. Well, it was that kind of experience that I was privileged to tap into on a much, much more magnified scale when I was in her presence, when I was in the presence of Maharaj and Paranan Tirth's guru, and much, much more so in presence of Maharishi and another saint that I absolutely adore, who is from South India also. Her name is Amaji, the hugging saint. So those are just a couple examples. And the Swami from North India that told me years later that he had traveled from the Himalaya to Kanyakumari to meet Mai Amma, and that's a couple thousand miles, I believe. He traveled all that distance by train to meet her, and he told a better story about her, in which I'd like to share now. He said, I went all the way down there having heard about her, and he said, I want to preface by saying I come from a high Brahmin family. A caste system is on the way out in India for the most people, but he came from a high Brahmin family. So he goes down there, and he's near the Devi temple that I mentioned, the Virgin Divine Mother, and she's not there. And he said, yeah, oh gosh, I traveled all these days and miles, kilometers. And he asked one of her chelas, when will she be? And the guy said, no one knows. She's out at sea. She could be, she's like the ancient mariner, you know, she's out at sea. And he goes, well, I don't have anything better to do. I'm just going to stay here, and it takes a month. It takes a month. And he said, well, it won't be a month, but it could be a few days, because she doesn't eat most of the time anyway. And maybe if a fish jumps up into her hand, she'll just munch on it. So anyway, so he waits and he waits. And the whole time he says, I decided, his name was Swami Ram Kripalu, was this guy's name. He said, so I was praying. I said, I'm sitting on the beach praying every night at sunset, praying to Mai Amma, please come. I've come all this way. Please come. I want to have your darshan. Please come. So I think on the second day he's praying, dozens of dogs started gathering around him on the shore. I mean, like 3 times as many as were there when we were there. And these dogs sensed something was happening. And sure enough, within about 20 minutes, this little figure could be seen out in the ocean, you know, and it was Mahayama on her driftwood, and she came in, and then she left the driftwood and swam in. And when she came out of the water, the dogs swarmed over her like bees on a hive. He said, I couldn't even see her. There were so many dogs licking her and jumping on her and adoring her and treating her. It was just crazy. You know, he could never see anything like it. So he also had been told, bring bananas, and he was prepared, but he didn't know any more than I did beyond that. And so he offered his bananas, and Mahayama graciously took the bananas. She was still soaking wet, took the bananas, peeled them, and started offering just the way she did to us, into a dog's mouth, into another. The dogs were extremely well behaved, according to Swami Ram Kripalu. But okay, went into one dog's mouth and then into the next dog's mouth. And as she was about to put the chunk of banana into Swamiji's mouth, he held up his hand and said, no. And it was a huge mistake. He told me, he said, because she slapped him hard on the face, just whacked him right across the cheek, and didn't say a word. But he said, I got it. He said, I had spiritual pride because I am a Brahmin, and as a Brahmin boy, we're raised with, you know, dogs are inferior, and he wasn't thinking about her being inferior. It was the dog thing. And so she slapped him really hard. And he said, I got it immediately. And he said, it's something that was worth the trip to South India just to have my ego adjusted. So, you know, in the end, picking a spiritual mentor, a lot of people will pick one for a lot of different reasons, but this is just from my experience of traveling around India and meeting true gurus and wannabe gurus and sort of gurus. Be discriminating, don't be in a rush, choose well, and, you know, look at the life, look at the actions of that individual that you're interested in, more than the words. What's their life? What's their lifestyle? What are they doing? How are they behaving? Because there's a big industry. The guru industry is large, and you just, anytime there's that possibility, then there can be spurious characters that may not be up to snuff. So I could tell you one example that I don't want to dominate here if you have other questions, but I could tell you one other story quickly. I had a friend who went to Bombay for panchakarma, which is the Ayurvedic treatment to rejuvenate the nervous system, and he was there. And he was a professional magician. And he went, and the head of the hospital in Bombay was a very skilled and talented Vaidya. Vaidya means Ayurvedic physician. And when the doctor learned that my friend was a professional magician, he said, I want you to teach me magic. And my friend said, well, you know, it's not like I can do that in a week. It takes time. I spent years reading books and mentoring with, you know, masters of magic and so on. And you got to have the skill in the hands and certain parts of your personality and presentation. He says, no, I can do all that stuff. You just got to teach me, and then I'll pick it up. I can pick it up. And my friend says, well, listen, you're a successful Vaidya. You've got a beautiful clinic, and people come from all around the world, like I am, to do that, to come here, to be with you, because you're a very good physician. Why do you want to be a guru? Why do you want to be a magician? And he said, because I want to be a guru. And if I can show magic tricks to people in India, then they'll follow me. And my friend goes, no, this isn't how it works. So anyway, I tell that story. I don't want to, you know, cast dispersion on the tradition of gurus, but there are, you know, possibilities out there. And I just think it's worth being alert to it. Yeah.
Discernment. Yes, of course. Wonderful stories. I'd like to bring us back to the present moment. and the present world situation, and anybody that's observing will know that we're in a remarkable time of transition now, and some people perceive it as maybe we're moving towards some kind of Armageddon, and some people perceive it as we're moving towards what the ascension, or moving towards the golden age, or the new earth, all these different terms. You've led a remarkable life, a remarkable spiritual life, and we've had conversations before, and I'm just interested to hear your perceptions of what's really happening right now.
Yeah. Well, let me preface this by saying, I would like to look at it through the lens of spirituality. We can talk about politics on the level of politics. We can talk about pandemics on the level of pandemics. But I think if we look at it, some of these issues through a lens of spiritual glasses, it might be helpful. I'm not going to jump in and promote one side or another here, but I'm going to make a couple observations, if I may. The one saint in India who I haven't talked about yet, and I alluded to him, his age, he was ageless in appearance. If I were to say, out of any human being I've ever met, he was on an entirely different level. And we started talking about how one attains what Maharishi once called an absolute body, a body that never perishes, a body that never ages, a body that never needs to eat or drink maybe a grain of rice or a sip of water, but a body that can transform itself into any form it likes. It can duplicate itself anytime. It can fly. It can disappear. A body that is what we call a perfected siddha, someone who has the powers that human beings should have, but don't have because we have been dumbed down over time by some nefarious characters on our planet. So he once said to me, he said, breath, or more specifically prana, is the most important quality in developing an ageless, immortal body. Now, I remember that comment and I thought to myself, okay, what are we all being asked to do for our health in this current situation? We're asked to breathe our carbon dioxide. We're asked to wear masks. We're asked to not breathe. And from a spiritual point of view, I could tell you a dozen gurus whose their principal technique is a type of pranayama, a breathing technique, because as the breath comes into all parts of our body, into the brain, into the heart, into the cells, it awakens consciousness. It's the interface. Prana is translated, P-R-A-N-A, is a Sanskrit word that's translated as life force or vital energy. And from my perspective, to mandate that people and children must wear a mask for 8 hours a day, that is criminal from a spiritual perspective. Okay, so we have agendas here, and I just want to throw that out, that if we have an interest in our spiritual progress, we have to honor that the human body needs oxygen, and not just gross oxygen, but subtle flow of prana to be healthy. And so that would be one comment I might have on the current conditions that we find ourselves in.
I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement with you there, and we may get some hate mail for this, but it's okay. We're okay with hate mail.
I put my mask on when I go into the Whole Food store because I don't want to, make people extremely unhappy that are around me, because I don't want people to freak out. I also don't, there's a sense that I got very early on in this whole drama that we've weaponized compassion. Now, I don't know if that term, out of compassion, we're turning in our friend. Oh, my friend, was with a person who was this, had his son has been tested positive. So, or whatever. So we've taken some of the finest human virtues, in my opinion, and used them detrimentally. So I feel that there are honestly some ulterior motives here. Enough said. As far as the political situation, let's look at the what I think people are calling these days identity politics. And let's pull back for a second. You know, everyone's promoting, okay, I want to have my special interest recognized by everyone else. And from the point of view of that person, they absolutely deserve it. We are all one. As human beings, we are all one. As a universe, we are all one. But unfortunately, on this planet, we can't prove it. We've lost that ability because we live under a veil of forgetfulness, a veil of Maya here, a veil of illusion that the Vedas talk about. And we see ourselves more as individuals. So this is the time in this incarnation to find out who is Steve is, who Guy is, who Sarah is. But if we pull back for a second, we need to understand that the house, the body, this house is just rented. And while we're renting it, we could paint it pink. We could paint it gray. We could redecorate the inside. We could even change the plumbing. But there's going to come a time when we're going to be asked to leave the house because we're only here for a short time. And if we put all our focus on renovating the plumbing, painting the house pink, you know, putting posh furniture in, we're focused on the material side of the thing. What we really want to do with a house is cultivate a feeling in there. We want, if the house is an analogy for the human being, we want to cultivate Devi's presence, the Divine Mother's presence in us through her Shakti, through her Kundalini, through her presence. That, you know, and that is irrespective of how tall I am, or what my gender is, or what my color is, or what my preference is. Kundalini, the primordial Shakti of Divine Mother, could care less what color we are, could care less what gender we are. But she does ask that we use her primordial energy constructively, because she'll let us use it in any way we want. We could use it as a serial killer. We could use her Shakti any way we want, but we will have to face the music if we choose to use it in a destructive manner, because we'll only destroy ourselves. So if we pull back from all this identity stuff, and I understand from a political point of view, people have not had a voice. People have been experienced strong prejudicial behavior. People have been mistreated in any number of ways. But if we pull back as a human being and say, okay, if we are really all one, think of the human body the way the universe is one, the human body is also one organism. Now, what if the liver said, hey, I'm not the same color as the heart. I'm a different size, but hey, I'm more important than the heart because without me, the toxins in my body would build up and we'd die. And then the brain says, hey, you're not as important as me because I'm telling all of you what you should do. I'm the king here, I'm guiding things. And the stomach says, none of you would even be alive if I weren't digesting this food, right? And it goes on like that. So each part contributes to the whole, and the whole, what we know, is greater than the sum of the parts. So I really feel like we're just in a phase where we're focusing on the liver and we're focusing on the stomach, but really we're going to go, this is going to morph into something where we're going to understand that whether I'm red or black or yellow or white or male or female, we're going to get beyond this very quickly. We have to get beyond this very quickly. And we're going to realize that we are all one. And I understand that if you're a 12-year-old and boys are bullying you because you're small or because of your color or this or that, it's no picnic. It's awful. I remember when I was in the playground when I was 12 years old. I was one of the, in that sense, lucky ones because I was athletic and big and so on. But I saw chubby kids getting bullied. I saw little kids getting bullied, being beat up. And you know, so that voice absolutely has to be there. But if we pull back from the lens of spirituality, we realize that we're here not primary for the material experience. We're here to move to understand that this is a rented house. And it's a gift of any color. It's a gift. of any gender. It's a God's gift, and we really want to use that gift to grow spiritually, grow in every way we can. And so that's how I would answer, what's going on right now. I do feel in the question of the big picture, honestly don't think it's completely decided yet, whether we go apocalyptic or ascension. But my Himalayan friend that I kind of would like to save now to talk a little bit about, in my book, I call him Keshava. He has many names. I've met him on several occasions. And as the Swami who was in silence up in Gangotri, Paranand Tirth, said in one of his, when he was writing some things, he was sharing some insights. He said, my guru lives 100 miles away from me, but I get his communication every day. And it's as clear as how you're writing your communication with me right now. Call it whatever you want, telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience. These are siddhis. These are natural abilities of a human being in other ages.
Siddhi means power, is that right?
Yeah, S-I-D-H-I means power. And so having had the physical contact with meeting this saint from the Himalayas, the relationship continued even after I came back to the US in terms of intuitional exchange of knowledge. So Keshava said the future is not, this yogi who I considered to be substantially beyond any other human being I'd ever met, saint or otherwise. He said the future is never fixed. It's like an ocean. The water is constantly churning and changing directions, and the temperature doesn't stay constant. So it's not a fixed deal. And he said, though, that there'll come a time when human beings will ascend in as many numbers as human beings are being buried in the ground today. So that was encouraging. Now, we know that there are examples of ascension. Ascension was something that a hallmark of Christian faith, that Jesus, after his crucifixion, ascended, and many people saw him on the mountain, and he was, in flesh, and he talked to them, and he said, now, and they knew he was different. He had a new body, a body that was ageless. And in the Tibetan tradition, there are tens of thousands of Tibetan lamas and holy persons who have achieved what they call a rainbow body. Why do they call it a rainbow body? Because during this 7-day ritual they go through, rainbows appear around that holy person when they're meditating or going through this ritualistic transformation. Rainbows appear. No one's burning incense, but you can smell it. Flowers appear, flower petals, and on and on and on. And at the end of the transformation, they have achieved an ageless body. Now, which some people call ascension, other people call, Maharishi referred to it as a form of an absolute body. And when I asked him personally, Maharishi, you only talked about it once to my knowledge. He said, I did, but I did talk about it in Spain that time, but I looked around the room, there were probably 2,000 people in the room. He said, I could see no one was ready for this. There's nobody who was on the verge or needing this knowledge, so I never talked about it again. But an absolute body is Vedically chronicled, and it may not be exactly or precisely the same as a perfected siddha's body, like I was talking about, that never ages. It may not be precisely the same mechanism to achievement as the rainbow body, but they're all in the same category. And Keshava said this will be a natural human experience over time, not maybe a year from now. And it has been that way on Earth in past yugas. Yugas are great blocks of time, hundreds of thousands of years that are mentioned in the Vedas, the Indian scriptures. And if you look at the yuga called Sat Yuga, the epic of truth, we'll find that human beings live for thousands of years, at least according to the records. And so Keshava had many, many fascinating things to say. And one of the great things that I took from one of his lessons was that if I maintain an attitude of gratitude in life, grace would be the result. And he said, grace is all it takes. Grace is what it takes to achieve these kinds of things. The grace of God, the grace of your guru, the grace of divine beings. And they are always willing and wanting to help, but they need the invitation. And gratitude is that letter saying, please help. So that was one of the things I've always remembered. And when I asked him also, well, what do you think is the most important thing in a spiritual seeker? His comment was perseverance. Don't give up. Don't give up the journey. The journey, you may have an idea, oh, the journey. Maharishi once told us all we'd be enlightened in 5 to 8 years. Well, it didn't happen for so many people, but I was absolutely delighted that he gave me that time frame, because I don't know if I would have jumped on board if I had thought it was going to take 50 to 80 years or 5 to 8 lifetimes. But I'm ecstatic that I got, in the ship and started sailing. So grace, I think, is important. And he also said that when the time is right, it can happen with the scent of incense. It could happen with the honk of a horn. Anything could not ascension, but a transformation in consciousness to a state of enlightenment. Ascension is still up the trail from basic states of enlightenment, because you're now transforming your body into ways that, we watch these Marvel superheroes, it's very popular and I think it's great, or the Harry Potter series, and we see people doing magical things and we think, oh, that's mythology, or that's fictional, but it all comes from a source of truth. Harry Potter's stories of magicians and so forth, it comes from a basis of some truth in the universe. So do the superhero stories. And human capacity has been reduced down for various reasons. Another thing that I would comment on, kind of jumping around here, in the world of taking the jab in the arm, I've read a fair number of immunologists, people with Ph.D.s and heads of research institutes that are very concerned about modifying human DNA through some preventative measure for what we're going through in the virus. And one of the things that Kesha told me about is that in former times, we had 12 strands of DNA. And the DNA, and Maharishi talked a great deal about the DNA being the blueprints of human consciousness, being the building blocks of human consciousness. And when the DNA is utilizing 10% of its potential, then we are using 10% of our potential as a human being. When the DNA grows and develops through spiritual practice and through the enlivenment and awakening of our divine mother within us, Kundalini and so forth, the human nervous system is holier than any temple, we know, if it's treated right. Temples are just examples of the human nervous system. That's all they're meant to be. So he said that if we can, Kesava said, if we can reconstruct and rebuild our DNA through prana, through techniques, spiritual techniques, through chanting, through recitation, through yagyas, through natural means of medical intervention, meaning Ayurveda, for example, or natural medicine in your country, we can rebuild and reconstruct what we've lost over time as we've lost this, really special part of our bodies. But if we start playing around on those fundamental levels of DNA, thinking, oh, some scientist wants to play God, and he says, okay, I can alter, I can insert some DNA into this, some genome here and something here, and I can make that person immune to something. To my mind, spiritually, from a spiritual lens, we are playing with fire. And I do not believe that there's ever been a disease on the earth that we did not have a natural antidote for. We're far better off building our immunity through proper air and healthy interaction and being on a beach or being on a mountain, sitting in our bedroom, worrying. Fear is the absolute greatest problem for a strong immune system we could have. It weakens our immune system. So don't want to get too much further into this, but these are my observations and just trying to reference a few people who I respect their wisdom, because there are very many wise people out there today who are saying, you should take the jab. We need to take the jab. I don't plan to. So,
well, thanks for sharing that, Steve, and thanks for the courage to speak your truth on that topic. And I personally, I feel that this is a time that it's kind of a spiritual test maybe for some people of exercising their own free will and their own sovereignty and making their own decisions, and not necessarily appealing to a higher authority, whether it's their spiritual teacher or somebody on the television.
We are experiencing a crucible in human, a crossroads. And as you asked earlier, or stated earlier, very, very intelligently, Guy, which is it? Are we going into an apocalypse, or are we going into a planetary ascension? I don't want to muddy the waters, but there could be a bit of each here. What I notice is that people are absolutely dead set on their point of view. And I don't try to convince anyone of my point of view. I mean, I'm saying some things now. I honestly am not trying to convince anybody that you should do this or do that. But I think open discussion and information allows us to make our best choices. And I am a major proponent that humanity has been given, as part of their experience, the right to free will. And if we lose free will, there are cultures who don't have free will. As Americans growing up in this country, I took it for granted that I could do the things I wanted. I could be a famous tennis player if I was good enough. I don't think we can guarantee anyone's outcome in life. And if we start saying, doesn't matter who you are, we're going to give you the same outcome, I say that's a red flag for me. I say we need to have merit. We need to have creativity. And if I'm going to have the same outcome this guy is going to have, regardless of what I do and regardless of how brilliant he is, then I may just kind of lay back on my couch and let the days go by. And I don't really think that's is intended, but my free will gives me that option. So when society starts to structure programs and policies that says, okay, we're all going to guarantee a same outcome for all of you. Well, we know where that has been in history, and I'm old enough, you're old enough to know that those experiments didn't work very well. And I've had discussions and arguments with people say, yeah, but you lived in Europe. There's so much more of a socialistic theme in Europe, and I do, and I do believe it, that it's there, and I've been in Norway, and they do brilliantly in Norway. But they have $1 billion. I don't know what their endowment is. Not this major oil endowment in Norway, and it allows so much that is wonderful. So anyway, that's a digression, but I would say that if we're on a spiritual path, Guy, even before we're in the womb, we sit down with our guides. Maybe we had a guru in our last life for 5 lifetimes ago, and that guru he or she's not the guru just for that particular life. If they really take on the role as Guy's guru, they're going to be with you through thick and thin, through your good times, your bad times, through the times you need it most, are the bad times. And they're going to sit down with you, with other guides, with your spirit guide, with your guardian angel, and you're going to have a little powwow before you come into this life. And while you're sitting in that powwow, if you've had some spiritual development, you're going to know the oneness of life at that point in time, and that the people around you love you as themselves. And you're going to talk about, well, who should we pick for my mother? What should I do for my career? Is there a spouse I need to learn something from before I go down there? You know, what are going to be my trials and tribulations? Am I going to end up with cancer? And am I going to lose my daughter in childbirth? Am I going to be a famous? What are the choices and what are the things I should think about doing to further my evolution? And some of the harder things that I mentioned might be the things that will further my evolution most. So it's discussed in advance. Okay, so you have a game plan. It's sort of like you're the principal actor in a play and you're about to go on stage. And you've rehearsed your lines, you've memorized your lines, you've gone through the dry runs, you know the other actors, you know who your anti-hero is in the play, the nemesis, the villain, you know the director's wishes, you know when the music starts, and you know when the play ends, and all the plot. But then when you come out of your little heavenly conversation with all of these well-meaning guides, and you go into the womb and you come out of the womb, it's all forgotten. Every last bit of it is forgotten. Now, there are some saints who do remember. They do recall being in the womb. They do recall all of it, including coming out. But why does that happen to us? Because when we come out, we move into a world that has a veil upon it, a veil of forgetfulness. In the Indian tradition, they call it Maya, illusion. We forget who we are. We jump into a game, we jump into a stage play. It's like that main character in the play. She walks out on the stage as the star of the show, and suddenly a fog descends on her. She can't even remember her lines. She can't remember who the other characters are. She can't remember when to leave the stage, when to stay on the stage, but she's got to perform because there's 500 people out there watching. So we go into this situation in life and we have to find our way through it, and we make mistakes and we learn. We have triumphs and we feel elation. We feel we're in the zone. And it's never going to be the same from year to year. You know, there's this astrological stuff going on, and we have peaks and valleys, but we are in this veil of individuality where we don't know. And I don't think science can prove that we are all one. They're trying, because it's on the level that's not material, but it's there. It's like that human body, all the parts are there, and one part saying, hey, I'm more important than you are. In the end, if one part fails, we're on life support. Doesn't matter which part. If the stomach fails, we're on life support. If the liver fails, you know, we're on dialysis, kidney, whatever. So we're thrust into this game of forgetfulness. The rubric, the maze we're trying to get through, is finding our way back to source, where the Maya lifts. And when the Maya lifts once and for all, that we could say the self has been realized, and we realize that, hey, it didn't really matter that I was red in my skin. It didn't really matter that I was 6'4". It didn't really matter that I was had a disability. It didn't really matter. What mattered is I found my way through the maze and I got back to who I really am. I finished the game. And I asked Keshava one time, I said, why do you make this game so bloody difficult? He says, well, if the game was too easy, it'd be over too fast. Hey, you know, that's easy for you to say. You completed the game. We're in the game and we're trying to work our way through it. He said, no, we're patient. Human beings sometimes aren't patient, especially when you get on the spiritual path. You know, you want to sprint to the finish line, but it's really more of a marathon in some ways than a sprint. And there are going to be some hurdles along the way, and it may not, you know, be done in one lifetime. We may get derailed. We may have some unsuccessful lifetimes, but we will always have another chance. So pulling back again and having that lens, that broader lens, I hope if there's anything I could share today, and that is having that broader lens, that we're in the middle of some rough waters, but the rough waters, the storm doesn't last forever. The sun comes out. I believe that, you know, we're facing a transformation of our society and our planet, and that we're going to end up in a ascended. Those who want it are going to have that chance, and those who don't want it Well, they won't because they don't want it. They're going to go somewhere else. Somebody's going to go somewhere else. I don't believe that the apocalyptists and the ascensionists are necessarily going to end up in the same, when they go to the end of the maze, they're going to have the same experience. So that's just a personal perspective. If you have any question or comment on it, fire away.
That was beautiful. Beautiful. There's so much wisdom there. Actually, my last question to you was what advice do you have for younger people? A lot of my audience are younger people. I think you actually already gave some beautiful advice for younger people. If you have anything else that you'd like to say for the younger audience, I mean, both of us are kind of we're moving into our elder energy now, where we have some experience, and and let's I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Well, I am a teacher. I was a teacher of meditation. I've taught tennis for the last 10 years. And in those 10 years, most of my students have been between ages 6 and 18. I've also taught 70-year-olds. What I love to see in young people, and these may be younger people than is your main audience, but this holds true for anyone, even an octogenarian, that when you wake up in the morning, there should be something on your plate that you're passionate about. And you have a son. I remember seeing your son playing soccer and training like crazy to be a soccer. And I thought, he's passionate about soccer. Fabulous. My stepson was passionate about writing, and he was passionate about, he has a 2nd-degree black belt in Taekwondo. He was passionate about that growing up. And he's still passionate about Vedic things and learning Sanskrit and so on. So the word passionate is meaningful to me. If you're a musician, if you want to be a spiritual leader, become passionate about it and do the work. Go through the process, master that field. If you like to cook, be passionate about it, and wake up excited about your life. And don't wake up and let the screen. I mean, we're on a screen right now, but don't let the screen be the main character, and you be the secondary character in your life. Take the opportunity to use that creativity, that energy, because the more we use it and use it for others, the more will be given of it. And so I just say that the Divine Mother can give us an infinite amount of anything when we're deserving, when she believes that we'll use it, because there's no limit to it. And it's really turning on the tap. You turn on that tap and it will flow through you. But there are ways that we can shut the tap down, misdeeds, whatever. We can shut it down. And I would just give that advice, that find the things that expand your heart. Find the things that expand your boundaries, excite you, excite your friends, and go for it. And you'll be surprised there's no limit. Some of the greatest tennis players in the world were not the most talented tennis players in the world, but they just loved what they did, and they lived it, and they did it. And I think you could say that for an actor or a musician or a computer scientist or a biologist or a chef. It's just, and that's the whole deal. That's the game. And as we learn through those things and we augment it with our spiritual practice, we move closer to getting to the end of the maze, getting past that stage where we're living in this veil, within this veil of forgetfulness, this Maya. That's the real game here. And once you realize that's the real game and you plug into it and say, hey, I'm passionate about finding the end of this maze, then we're really going somewhere, because there's in case you want to say, says there are many more games out there. Get through this maze, and there's really cool issues. Maharishi once says enlightenment is really the beginning of life rather than the goal of life. It's just it's really the launching. I'm roughly paraphrasing. It's really the point of launching into what's really, really happening in the universe. It's kind of like the starting point rather than the ending point. We view it as an ending point because we're trying to get out of this illusionary thing, and we are. and we will as a group, as a culture, as a planet. We're kind of all in this together, and unless you really don't want to be a part of it, you are a part of it. So that's a comment. That's a summary comment, I guess.
That was wonderful, wisdom there. What are you passionate about right now? Put you on the spot.
I always come. Yeah, no, it's not. I am as passionate about my tennis students as I ever have been. I continually subscribe to new training courses, and I was in Los Angeles with my top student 2 years ago. He was in the top 10, 12-year-olds in the country, and we were training with the national coaches. And I was lapping it up, just watching everything they said, because I'm an old man. I mean, I'll be 68. And I play with these kids, and they beat the heck out of me because they're very good.
Yeah, sure.
But, there's more to learn. So I'm passionate about teaching. I'm passionate about getting back to Switzerland because I love hiking in the Alps. My wife and I, because we can breathe the prana we want to breathe in the Alps. I mean, it's not like it's the only place, but it's a rarefied thing. It's special. When we come home, I'm passionate about that kind of travel. I'm passionate about becoming a scratch golfer. I've been hanging around about 6 handicap for so long, and as you may know, I don't know, the closer you get to being a low handicap golfer, it's harder and harder to get there. So those are 2 tiny things. I used to be very passionate about cooking. Now my wife's taking care of me, and I just kind of went on a retirement program for that. And I'm passionate about my relationship with my family, especially I view my wife as my mentor, and I don't know, what the next day brings in the relationship. Or Amma, the hugging saint, used to say, we don't know if we'll be breathing tomorrow. So I'm passionate about today. The longer I live, the more I just devote all my time and energy to what I can do in this moment, and the future becomes better for me if I do that. So those are a few passions. And needless to say, I'm passionate about the spiritual path, and I've got 2 books with one a rough draft written and one a major outline. So if I can get it together, I'll get those books done as well. I held up the memoir book. I want to promote. I held up this one. That's the one I wrote about the 7 years in India. And if you don't mind, I'm going to hold up this one. This is a work of fiction, and there's the guy.
The Tale of the Himalayan Yogis.
This is up at Gangotri, the place. Yeah, Tale of the Himalayan Yogis, right? And that area where that guy is sitting on the rock in the cover picture is the area that I was talking about at the beginning, the Gangotri region of the Himalayas. Writing is the other passion.
Oh, wonderful. And I'll put the links to your books in the description, your website. Your website is stevebriggsauthor.com?
Yeah, stevebriggsauthor.com. Yeah. And if you go to that site, there's an email address. I'm happy, to correspond with people. I've done some other interviews and talked about this sort of topic. And I've had, wonderful conversations with Sufis and with various people who've called or texted me or emailed from Europe and Asia, and it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. This has just been a pure joy for me, Steve. I feel like I've been on a journey this last 90 minutes or so. I've been to the Himalayas and beyond, and really the inner journey. And you're fascinating. You've had an amazing life and amazing wisdom to share. And I inspire everybody to, look up your books and yeah, by all means, reach out to Steve. Just thank you so much. It was a real pleasure.
Well, thank you, Guy, for having me on. I enjoyed spending the time with you, and hopefully we'll do it again one day.
Yes, yeah, I'd love to have you back on.
Great.
Good. Thank you, Steve.
All the best to everyone, and we'll all, as a group, get through these trying times. I'm absolutely confident.
Wonderful.
Take care, everyone.
Good. Thank you, Steve.